Today's video is sponsored by MyHeritage. The great god Pan is dead, cried a voice from the passing ship in Italy in the 1st century CE. Whilst the messenger is unknown, the message caught the attention of Plutarch, who recorded the incident which occurred during the reign of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. The god Pan was the god of the wild, shepherds and their flocks, rustic music, and a companion to the nymphs. He had the hind quarters, legs, and horns of a goat in the same manner of a faun or satyr. But why was Pan declared dead? And why was his distinctive therianthropic appearance borrowed and consequently demonized by Christianity when they constructed their appearance of the devil? Well, let's break down the transition of the revered god to a demon, and then finally, the dark angel himself. But before we get into today's video, what if I told you that I recently discovered that, genetically speaking, I am 0% English? Well, what am I? Well, thanks to my partnership with MyHeritage, who have partnered with me for today's video, I can share with you what I've discovered about my ancestry. Before we get into my results, let me tell you about MyHeritage. MyHeritage is the #1 DNA service in Europe, and it's incredibly easy to take a test. Well, I have received the MyHeritage DNA kit. So keep this kit activation reminder for my records, all rightio. So I have my kit number and the setup, and you have to set up your DNA kit before you actually launch your information, which is good to know. So we have 2 of these and 2 of these wee little vials as well. Remove 1 cheek swab from its wrapper and use the swab head to scrape the inside of 1 of your cheeks, not both. So to pick which one. Favoritism. And rotate it for 30 to 60 seconds. Then open the 1 vial, insert the swab inside, snap it down. And then we swab the other cheek. So the hardest thing I have to do is remember which cheek I swabbed first, which you think would be easy, but it's me. So we're going to go left first, then right. Left first, then right. All you have to do is swab the inside of each of your cheeks for 30 seconds. Pop these little swabs into vials and then place the vials in a plastic bag and then into the enclosed envelope. You just pop your wee little vials in the teeny tiny pre-addressed envelope, and that's it. That's my DNA off. So we'll find out in 3 to 4 weeks who I am. What am I? I chose to partner with MyHeritage because of their commitment to their users' privacy. They never sell or license your genetic DNA, and you remain the sole owner of your DNA data. Whilst you're waiting for your results, you can upload and use their photo features to enhance, colorize, and even animate your old family photos, and you can build out your family tree. Okay, you join me fresh post-exercise because I just received my results and I want to react to them, so I'm reacting to them live without any skincare. Hello, my little dogs. They want the fuss. Okay, so whilst the dogs join me, let's find out what my results are. So my prediction is basically 50% Irish, 50% English. Nothing else that I know about. So let's go. Cinzia, ready to explore your ethnicity in very exciting times. Let's have a loading. Cinzia, you are 78.1% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. 78, which means my mother is some. 10.8% Scandinavian. What? Where have you come from? 7.8% East European. Amazing. 2.5% Baltic, which would explain why I love the cold weather. I'm going to make that guess. And then less than 1% Middle Eastern. Again, where did that come from? I just had a quick look, so I was curious, and there is an ethnicity classified as English. So I'm 0% English. and I'm nearly 80% basically Irish, and then little bits of it are Scottish and Welsh by the looks of things, the breakdown, but primarily Irish, which means my mother has Irish ancestry that she has no idea about. Also Scandinavian, also Eastern European, which no one in my family has any idea about. So that's fascinating. I'm basically what, they would call a plastic paddy over in Ireland. So I love it. I feel a bit sad that I don't know more about my Irish family. Once you get your results, you can locate and identify relatives from around the world, and trust me, you'll never know what to expect when you log on to discover your family history. I have a lot of relatives in America, apparently, unexpectedly. If you're curious about discovering your ancestry, then please make sure to check out the link to MyHeritage in the description box and the pinned comment, and use the code LADY for free shipping. Thank you very much, MyHeritage, for partnering with me for today's video. And now let's get back to talking about the great god Pan. So, who was Pan? As always, myths vary from source to source, so let's piece together what we know about Pan. Pan has various parents. According to some, he is the son of Hermes by the daughter of Dryope. To others, he was the son of Hermes by Penelope. Yes, Penelope, as in Odysseus's wife, whom the god visited in the shape of a ram, apparently. There are other stories which claim that he is a son of Penelope by Odysseus, or by all of the suitors. I don't know how that works either. And then there are tales in which he is the son of Aether and Onus, or a Nereid, or he's the son of Uranus and Ge. Then, interestingly, Aeschylus believed that there were more than one Pan. He believed there were two Pans, one who was the son of Zeus and the other who was the son of Kronos. According to the Homeric hymn to Pan, which may date from as early as the 5th century BCE, when the newborn Pan's nurse first saw his goatish face, shaggy legs and cloven hooves, she fled in terror and never returned. His father, Hermes, who was a trickster himself, absolutely delighted by having a mischievous offspring, and he showcased him to the other gods in Mount Olympus, who welcomed this little divine creature. Pan was known as the pastoral god from Arcadia, who was raised by nymphs. The mythical Arcadia, the land of many springs, was the virgin wilderness home to dryads, nymphs, and natural spirits, a paradise of supernatural entities and utopian desires. Similar to how trends such as cottagecore exist today, pastoral literature was created by urban poets nostalgic for the perceived simplicity of an idealized version of country life, far removed from the hard and grueling lives and labor of rural workers in the ancient world. Most know of Arcadia thanks to Virgil's Eclogues, the fountainhead from which centuries-long pastoral traditions arose. According to the myth, apart from Hephaestus, all the gods common to the Greeks could be found in Arcadia, but archaeological evidence in the form of bronze statues dedicated to Pan have proven that he specifically was worshipped by the shepherds in the region of Arcadia. I mean, the real Arcadia, since at least the 5th century BCE. Even in pastoral poetry, we get hints of Pan's threatening status. The Greek poet Theocritus, the 3rd century BCE, features Pan in several of his idylls, which dramatizes conversations and singing contests between rural characters. And in these poems, we see Pan as a figure of dread and wrath. Quote, "You sleep there upon the leaf-strewn earth, god Daphnis, and rest your weary frame, while your netting stakes are left planted on the hillside. But Pan is after you, and Priapus also, with the yellow ivy of his jolly head. They are going side by side into your cave. Quick then, put off the lethargy of the shed of sleep, and up with you and away." For most ancient Greeks, the Arcadians were people who existed midway between savagery, and civic life. They spoke a dialect closer to Mycenaean than Classical Greek, and were believed to be the first Greeks of the Peloponnese. Paul Robichaud explains how the Arcadians were regarded as older than the moon, and were hunters and eaters of acorns, which suggested to other Greeks that they were survivors from a time long before farming was invented. Though he would have existed orally before, the earliest archaeological evidence of the worship of Pan dates back to the late 6th century, and then the first written records of Pan is in Pindar's Pythian Odes, dated around the 4th century BCE. Later, Pan enters history in the works of Herodotus, who records how Pan appeared to an Athenian runner, promising to help the Greeks in the Persian Wars, a promise which he fulfills by instilling panic in the Persian army. The power to induce panic and fear in humans is among Pan's oldest attributes, persisting in appearances throughout classical myth and literature, including pastoral poetry. For Socrates, Pan is a dear god with the power to reconcile our inner and outer worlds, which is a very significant philosophical approach to a god associated with flogs and terror. Pausanias claimed that causeless terror are said to come from the god Pan, and detailed how Pan had once brought panic to an invading army of Gauls, causing them to slay one another and then flee, and he employed a similar tactic against the Persians when he brought victory to the Athenians at Marathon. After around 100 BCE, we begin to see a heavy emphasis on the imagery depicting Pan as a performer of erotic play and sexual threat, with sculptures depicting him grabbing the arm of vulnerable Aphrodite or tugging playfully with Eros. According to historian Robin Lane Fox, Roman women with several sexual partners were called Pan girls, meaning that it was possible that these images reflected this tradition. Pan's most renowned role in classical mythology and contemporary understanding of the myth is that of the seducer of the nymphs. Roman depictions of Pan were more likely to foreground sexuality, as a sculpture of Pan found in Herculaneum portraying the god as copulating with a goat lying on her back demonstrates. Speaking of goats, let's talk about Pan's appearance a little more, shall we? Out of all the Olympian gods, he certainly looked the most distinctive and was the only one to blur the lines between human and animal. The Greeks themselves identified Pan with the Egyptian god Min, a horned god of fertility and the desert, or the Egyptian wilderness. Herodotus identified Pan with the Egyptian city and the god the Greeks called Mendes. Herodotus wrote that the Mendesians reckon Pan among the 8 gods, who they say were before the 12 gods. Now in their painting and sculpture, the image of Pan is made with the head and the legs of a goat, as among the Greeks. Not that he is thought to be in fact such, or unlike other gods, but why they represent him so I have no wish to say. Herodotus goes on to say that in the Egyptian language, Mendes is a name both for the he-goat and for Pan. In my lifetime, a strange thing occurred in this dialect. A he-goat had intercourse openly with a woman. This came to be publicly known. Herodotus had all the gossip. According to Pausanias, the first person in Arcadia was Pelasgos, who established the worship of Zeus in Mount Lycaon. Pelasgos was succeeded by his son Lycaon, who was turned into a wolf by Zeus when he sacrificed a human child. If you're interested in this myth, you can go listen to my podcast episode about the history of werewolves, where I discuss this myth in more depth. So why was Pan a goat? Well, in the ancient world, goats were regarded as libidinous animals, so it makes sense that Pan bore features of them, especially from the waist down. The most famous myth of the character is detailed in Ovid's Metamorphoses, in which the beautiful nymph and follower of Diana, Syrinx, was harassed and hounded by the lustful Pan. After realizing that she would never be safe from his predatory hunting, she prayed to the nymphs to protect her. The moment Pan had his hands around her, he found himself instead clutching a handful of reeds. As he sighed in disappointment, the reeds made a sound with his breath, and he found it so enchanting that he bound the reeds together with wax and created panpipes, for which he was forever renowned, so much so that he even beat the god Apollo and his lyre in a musical contest in another myth. There are two other nymphs associated with Pan, Echo and Pitys. Before Echo fell in love with Narcissus, she had conceived a child with Pan, a nymph named Ianx, whom Hera later transformed into a bird as punishment for casting a love spell on Zeus. In one tradition, Echo is actually torn apart by the followers of Pan for refusing his advances. Nonnos, the Christian poet, is one of the other two sources which details Pan's relationship with Pitys, who, in a similar case to Syrinx, planted herself in Gaia, the earth, and turned into a pine tree to protect herself from Pan's sexual advances. In another tale, told by Sextus Propertius, Pitys is actually thrown off a cliff by Boreas, the god of the north wind, because she actually prefers the attention of Pan to that of himself. Strangely, Pan is presented as somewhat of a matchmaker and protector of lovers in later writings. In the tale of Cupid and Psyche, which I've covered in depth in another video, Pan assisted Psyche after she attempts to end her life when Cupid abandons her. You see, overcome by grief, Psyche throws herself into the river, which then lifts her back onto its banks, refusing to let her drown, and Pan actually uses his powers of divination to discern the cause of her unhappiness and help her win Cupid back. Then, in the only surviving work by Greek novelist Longus, Daphnis and Chloe, Pan protects the two lovers and instills panic in any of the enemies that they face. So all of this said, none of Pan's origin would suggest that he was mortal in any way, which makes his subsequent death in the Hapax account by Plutarch in his dialogue on the disappearance of oracles curious, to say the least. Dionysus or Dionysos is the only other god who is known to die, but he is actually reborn, whereas Pan is the only one who is ever reported to have died and never come back. He is technically a god, but Plutarch's intention was to demonstrate that demons, who are intermediates to gods and men, may be mortal at times, and thus Pan, he suggests, is a demon, not a god. The death of an alleged god was all the vindication needed for the followers of a newish faith arising at the time, Christianity. The early Christian historian Eusebius, circa 340 CE, argued that Pan's death occurred as Jesus was exorcising demons through his ministry, and to most Christians, the pagan gods were demons in disguise. Summoning the god Pan had already been documented as a dangerous activity. The pagan philosopher Porphyry recorded that 9 of his worshippers had died of fright when the god appeared to them, and Eusebius used Porphyry's account to draw conclusions about the god, claiming that he was a servant of Dionysos and that the death of his worshippers indicated that he was not good, but an evil demon. By 323 CE, when the Emperor Constantine proclaimed Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire, the classical pagan image of Pan came to an end, and he disappeared from public sight, along with the other pagan gods. And then the horns and hooves that Pan shares with modern images of the devil might suggest to some that medieval Christians followed Eusebius in imagining Pan as some kind of demon. And whilst their images have been synonymous, medieval images of Pan, the god, actually tell a different story. Medieval devils, although usually horned, are actually typically more scaly than they are shaggy and often have bat-like wings. Whilst Pan's appearance would eventually become synonymous with that of the devil, the few images of Pan surviving from the Middle Ages hold some surprising. In the 9th century Stagart Psalter, one of the most significant of the Carolingian period, we meet Pan just below Psalm 77. On the left, there are 12 tribes of Israel roaming in the wilderness, looking at a monkey in the upper right-hand corner of the illumination. Below that monkey, with a mischievous gleam in his eye, is Pan, complete with horns and hooves. He plays his pipes, and a faint smile lighting up his face. He has skin wrapped around his torso, and his smile is cheerful rather than diabolical. At the time, it was actually the monkey, or the ape, that was a symbol of lasciviousness, sin, malice, and cunning. In her work on apes in medieval art, Monica Ann Walder explains apes appear mostly in the margins of medieval manuscripts, but they can also be seen in columns and portals. As a general rule, apes appear parodying the actions of human beings, showing tricks learned from the minstrels as part of the visual representation of a fable or moralizing text, or they're fighting birds. In the Poeta de las Platerías in the Compostela Cathedral in Spain, the devil is represented as a winged ape tempting Christ in the desert. By extension, the images of chained monkeys ended up being associated with the souls of the damned in hell, Walder explains. So why is Pan there in the margins? Well, the rediscovery of classical antiquity in the Renaissance brought everyone around Europe back into contact with pagan symbols. And Christian Europeans like to create mythological interpretations of pagan mythology, avoiding the question of literal belief in pagan gods. By interpreting myths allegorically, Robertson explains, they could find spiritual meaning in them without directly challenging the authority of the church or their own faith. The allegorical Pan was a figure which symbolised heaven and earth, man and beast. In an interesting twist, as it were, the poet and humanist Paulus Marsus, who lived between 1440 and 1484, wrote commentary on Ovid's Fasti. Citing the authority of holiest men, Marsus claimed that Plutarch's story did indeed take place at the exact moment of Christ's death, because the death of Pan was really the death of Christ. Marsus claims that if Pan means all, then the Lord of all and of universal nature has died. So Pan and Christ are in sense identical. As you can imagine, this didn't go down well. He and his brother were members of the Roman Academy, which participated in antiquarian activities such as celebrating the founding of Rome, and they, along with many other members, were imprisoned in the 1460s for fomenting republicanism, paganism, and conspiracy. However, the Renaissance revived the pastoral image of Pan, and he became somewhat of a country bumpkin. And we can see across literary and artistic evidence from the 15th century onwards, from Francis Bacon's positive detailings of Pan in his work The Wisdom of the Ancients to the character Robin Goodfellow, that Pan was actually more regarded as a mischievous but helpful spirit, rather than an evil one associated with the devil. Thank you so much for listening to today's video with me, Chinsu Dubois, the Lady of the Library, and thank you to all of my patrons for making this possible, along with My Heritage for partnering today. Special thanks goes to my top tier patrons, Arch Capitalist, Nicholas Reed, and Andrea Bazil. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking, subscribing, following my newsletter, also my podcast, which is on Spotify and all other podcast platforms that I have been able to pop it on. Thank you ever so much again, and I shall see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.